The Jewish State by Theodor Herzl, Chapter 1, Introduction. It is astonishing how little insight into the science of economics many of the men who move in the midst of active life possess. Hence it is that even Jews faithfully repeat the cry of the anti-Semites. We depend for sustenance on the nations who are our hosts, and if we had no hosts to support us, we would die of starvation. This is a point that shows how unjust accusations may weaken our self-knowledge. And what are the true grounds for this statement concerning the nations that act as hosts? Where it is not based on limited physiocratic views, it is founded on the childish error that commodities pass from hand to hand in continuous rotation. We need not wake from long slumber, like Rip Van Winkle, to realise that the world is considerably altered by the production of new commodities. The technical progress made during this wonderful era enables a man of most limited intelligence to note with his short-sighted eyes the appearance of new commodities all around him. The spirit of enterprise has created them. Labour without enterprise is the stationary labour of ancient days, and typical of it is the work of the husbandman, who stands now just where his progenitors stood 1,000 years ago. All our material welfare has been brought about by men of enterprise. I feel almost ashamed of writing down so trite a remark. Even if we were a nation of entrepreneurs, such an absurdly exaggerated account would make us out to be. We should not require other nations to live on. We do not depend on the circulation of old commodities, because we produce new ones. The world possesses slaves of extraordinary capacity for work, whose appearance has been fatal to the production of handmade goods. These slaves are the machines. It is true that workmen are required to set machinery in motion, but for this we have the men in plenty, in superabundance. Only those who are ignorant of the condition of the Jews in many countries of Eastern Europe would venture to assert that Jews are either unfit or unwilling to perform manual labour. But I do not wish to take up the cudgel for the Jews in this pamphlet. It would be useless. Everything rational and everything sentimental that can possibly be said in their defence has been said already. If one's hearers are incapable of comprehending them, one is a preacher in a desert. And if one's hearers are broad and high-minded enough to have grasped them already, then the sermon is superfluous. I believe in the ascent of man to higher and yet higher grades of civilization. But I consider this ascent to be desperately slow. Were we to wait till the average humanity had become as charitably inclined as was Lessing when he wrote Nathan the Wise, we should wait beyond our day, beyond the days of our children, of our grandchildren, and of our great-great-grandchildren. But the world spirit comes to our aid in another way. This century has given the world a wonderful renaissance by means of its technical achievements. But at the same time, these miraculous improvements have not been employed in the service of humanity. Distance has ceased to be an obstacle, yet we complain of insufficient space. Our great steamships carry us swiftly and surely over hitherto unvisited seas. Our railways carry us safely into a mountain world, hitherto tremblingly scaled on foot. Events occurring in countries undiscovered when Europe confined the Jews in ghettos are known to us in the course of an hour. Hence, the misery of the Jews is an anachronism. Not because there was a period of enlightenment 100 years ago, for that enlightenment reached in reality only the choicest spirits. I believe that electric light was not invented for the purpose of illuminating the drawing rooms of a few snobs, but rather for the purpose of throwing light on some of the dark problems on humanity. One of these problems, and not the least of them, is the Jewish question. In solving it, we are working not only for ourselves, but also for many other overburdened and oppressed beings. The Jewish question still exists. It would be foolish to deny it. It is a remnant of the Middle Ages, which civilized nations do not even yet seem to be able to shake off, try as they will. They certainly showed a generous desire to do so when they emancipated us. The Jewish question exists wherever Jews live in perceptible numbers. Where it does not exist, It is carried by Jews in the course of their migrations. We naturally move to those places where we are not persecuted, and there our presence produces persecution. This is the case in every country, and will remain so, even in those highly civilized, for instance, France, until the Jewish question finds a solution on a political basis. The unfortunate Jews are now carrying the seeds of anti-Semitism into England. They have already introduced it into America. I believe that I understand anti-Semitism, which is really a highly complex movement. I consider it from a Jewish standpoint, yet without fear or hatred. I believe that I can see what elements there are in it of a vulgar sport, of common trade jealousy, of inheritance prejudice, of religious intolerance, and also of pretended self-defense. I think the Jewish question is no more a social than a religious one, notwithstanding that it sometimes takes these and other forms. It is a national question, which can only be solved by making it a political world question, to be discussed and settled by the civilized nations of the world in council. We are a people, one people. We have honestly endeavoured everywhere to merge ourselves in the social life of surrounding communities, and to preserve the faith of our fathers. We are not permitted to do so. In vain, we are loyal patriots, our loyalty in some places running to extremes. In vain do we make the same sacrifices of life and property as our fellow citizens. In vain do we strive to increase the fame of our native land in science and art, or her wealth by trade and commerce. In countries where we have lived for centuries, we are still cried down as strangers, and often by those whose ancestors were not yet domiciled in the land where Jews had already had experience of suffering. The majority may decide which are the strangers. For this, as indeed every point which arises in relations between nations, is the question of might. I do not here surrender any portion of our prescriptive right, when I make this statement merely in my own name as an individual. In the world, as it now is, and for an indefinite period will probably remain, might precedes right. It is useless, therefore, for us to be loyal patriots, as were the Huguenots, who were forced to emigrate, if we could only be left in peace. But I think we shall not be left in peace. Oppression and persecution cannot exterminate us. No nation on earth has survived such struggles and sufferings as we have gone through. Jew baiting has merely stripped off our weaklings. The strong among us were invariably true to their race when persecution broke out against them. This attitude was most clearly apparent in the period immediately following the emancipation of the Jews. Those Jews who were advanced intellectually and materially entirely lost the feeling of belonging to their race. Wherever our political well-being has lasted for any length of time, we have assimilated with our surroundings. I think this is not discreditable. Hence, the statesman who would wish to see a Jewish stain on his nation would have to provide for the duration of our political well-being, for old prejudices against us still lie deep in the hearts of the people. He who would have proofs of this need only listen to the people where they speak with frankness and simplicity. Proverb and fairy tale are both anti-Semitic. A nation is everywhere a great child, which can certainly be educated. But its education would, even in most favourable circumstances, occupy such a vast amount of time that we could, as already mentioned, remove our own difficulties by other means long before the process was accomplished. Assimilation, by which I understood not only external conformity in dress, habits, custom and language, but also identity of feelings and manner. Assimilations of Jews could be effected only by intermarriage, but the need for mixed marriages would have been felt by the majority. Their mere recognition by law would certainly not suffice. The Hungarian liberals, who have just given legal sanction to mixed marriages, have made a remarkable mistake, which one of the earliest cases clearly illustrates. A baptized Jew marries a Jewess. At the same time, the struggle to obtain the present form of marriage accentuated distinctions between Jews and Christians, thus hindering rather than aiding the fusion of races. Those who really wish to see the Jews disappear through intermixture with other nations can only hope to see it come about in one way. The Jews must previously acquire economic power sufficiently great to overcome the old-school prejudice against them. The aristocracy may serve as an example of this, for in its ranks occur the proportionately largest number of mixed marriages. The Jewish families which re-gild the old nobility with their money become gradually absorbed. But what form would this phenomenon assume in the middle class, where, Jews being a bourgeois people, the Jewish question is mainly concentrated? A previous acquisition of power could be synonymous with that economic supremacy which Jews are already erroneously declared to possess. And if the power they now possess creates rage and indignation among the anti-Semites, what outbreak would such an increase of power create? Hence, the first step towards absorption will never be taken, because this step would involve the subjection of the majority to a hitherto scorned minority, possessing neither military nor administrative power of its own. I think, therefore, that the absorption of Jews by means of their prosperity is unlikely to occur. In countries which are now anti-Semitic, my view will be approved. In others, where Jews now feel comfortable, it will probably be violently disputed by them. My happier co-religionists will not believe me till Jew-baiting teaches them the truth. For the longer the anti-Semitism lies in abeyance, the more fiercely it will break out. The infiltration of immigrating Jews, attracted to a land by apparent security, and the ascent in the social scale of native Jews combine powerfully to bring about a revolution. Nothing is plainer than this rational conclusion. Because I have drawn this conclusion with complete indifference to everything but the quest for truth, I shall probably be contradicted and opposed by Jews who are in easy circumstances. Insofar as private interests alone are held by their anxious or timid possessors to be in danger, they can safely be ignored, for the concerns of the poor and oppressed are of greater importance than theirs. But I wish from the outset to prevent any misconception from arising, particularly the mistaken notion that my project, if realised, would in the least degree injure property now held by Jews. I shall therefore explain everything connected with rights of property very fully. Whereas if my plan never becomes anything more than a piece of literature, things will merely remain as they are. It might more reasonably be objected that I am giving a handle to anti-Semitism when I say that we are a people, one people, that I am hindering the assimilation of Jews where it is about to be consummated, and endangering it where it is accomplished fact, insofar as it is possible for a solitary writer to hinder or endanger anything. This objection will be especially brought forward in France. It will probably be also made in other countries, but I shall answer only the French Jews beforehand, because these afford the most striking example of my point. However much I may worship personality, powerful individual personality in statesmen, inventors, artists, philosophers or leaders, as well as the collective personality of a historic group of human beings which we call a nation, however much I may worship personality, I do not regret its disappearance. Whoever can, will, and must perish, let him perish. But the distinctive nationality of Jews neither can, will, nor must be destroyed. It cannot be destroyed because the external enemies consolidate it. It will not be destroyed. This is shown during 2,000 years of appalling suffering. It must not be destroyed, and that is a descent of numberless Jews who refuse to despair. I am trying once more to prove in this pamphlet. Whole branches of Judaism may wither and fall, but the trunk will remain. Hence, if all or any of the French Jews protest against this scheme on account of their own assimilation, my answer is simple. The whole thing does not concern them at all. They are Jewish Frenchmen. Well and good. This is a private affair for the Jews alone. The movement towards the organisation of the state I am proposing would, of course, harm Jewish Frenchmen no more than it would harm the assimilated of other countries. It would, on the contrary, be distinctly to their advantage, for they would no longer be disturbed in their chromatic function, as Darwin puts it, but would be able to assimilate in peace, because the present anti-Semitism would have been stopped forever. They would certainly be credited with being assimilated to the very depths of their souls if they stayed where they are after the new Jewish state, with its superior institutions, had become a reality. The assimilated would profit even more than Christian citizens by the departure of faithful Jews, for they would be rid of the disquieting, incalculable, and unavoidable rivalry of the Jewish proletariat, driven by poverty and political pressure from place to place, from land to land. This floating proletariat would become stationary. Many Christian citizens, whom we call anti-Semites, can now offer determined resistance to the immigration of foreign Jews. Jewish citizens cannot do this, although it affects them far more directly. For on them they feel first of all the competition of individuals carrying on similar branches of industry, who, in addition, either introduce anti-Semitism where it does not exist, or intensify it where it does. The assimilated give expression to this secret grievance in philanthropic undertakings. They organise immigration societies for wandering Jews. There is a reverse to the picture which would be comic if it did not deal with human beings. For some of these charitable institutions are created not for, but against persecuted Jews. They are created to dispatch these poor creatures just as fast and as far as possible. And thus, many an apparent friend of the Jews turns out, on careful inspection, to be nothing more than an anti-Semite of Jewish origin, disguised as a philanthropist. But the attempts at colonisation made even by really benevolent men, interesting attempts though they were, have so far been unsuccessful. I do not think that this or that man took up the matter merely as an amusement, that they engaged in the emigration of poor Jews as one indulges in the racing of horses. The matter was too grave and tragic for such treatment. These attempts were interesting, in that they represented, on a small scale, the practical forerunners of the idea of a Jewish state. They were even useful, for out of their mistakes may be gathered experience for carrying the idea out successfully on a larger scale. They have, of course, done harm also. The transportation of anti-Semitism to new districts, which is the inevitable consequence of such artificial infiltration, seems to me to be the least of these evils. Far worse is the circumstance that unsatisfactory results tend to cast doubt on intelligent men. What is impractical or impossible to simple argument will remove this doubt from the minds of intelligent men. What is unpractical or impossible to accomplish on a small scale need not necessarily be so on a larger one. A small enterprise may result in loss under the same conditions which would make a large one pay. A rivulet cannot be navigated by boats. The river into which it flows carries stately iron vessels. No human being is wealthy or powerful enough to transplant a nation from one habitation to another. An idea alone can achieve that, and this idea of a state may have the requisite power to do so. The Jews have dreamt this kingly dream all through the long night of their history. "Next year in Jerusalem" is our old phrase. It is now a question of showing that the dream can be converted into a living reality. For this, many old, outgrown, confused and limited notions must first be entirely erased from the minds of men. Dull brains might, for instance, imagine that this exodus would be from civilized regions into the desert. That is not the case. It will be carried out in the midst of civilization. We shall not revert to a lower stage. We shall rise to a higher one. We shall not dwell in mud huts. We shall build new and more beautiful and more modern houses and possess them in safety. We shall not lose our acquired possessions. We shall realise them. We shall surrender our well-earned rights only for better ones. We shall not sacrifice our beloved customs. We shall find them again. We shall not leave our old home before the new one is prepared for us. Those only will depart who are sure thereby to improve their position. Those who are now desperate will go first, after them the poor, next the prosperous, and last of all the wealthy. Those who go in advance will raise themselves to a higher grade, equal to those whose representatives will shortly follow. Thus the exodus will be at the same time an ascent of the class. The departure of the Jews will involve no economic disturbances, no crises, no persecutions. In fact, the countries they abandon will revive to a new period of prosperity. There will be an inner migration of Christian citizens into the positions evacuated by Jews. The outgoing current will be gradual, without any disturbance, and its initial movement will put an end to anti-Semitism. The Jews will leave as honoured friends, and if some of them return, they will receive the favourable welcome and treatment at the hands of civilised nations as is accorded to all foreign visitors. Their exodus will have no resemblance to a flight, for it will be a well-regulated movement under the control of public opinion. The movement will not only be inaugurated with absolute conformity to law, but it cannot even be carried out without the friendly cooperation of interested governments, who would derive considerable benefit from it. Security for the integrity of the idea and the vigour of its execution will be found in the creation of a body corporate or corporation. This corporation will be called the Society of Jews. In addition, it will be a Jewish company, an economically productive body. An individual who attempted even to undertake this huge task alone would either be an impostor or a madman. The personal character of the members of the corporation will guarantee its integrity, and the adequate capital of the company will prove its stability. These prefatory remarks are merely intended as a hasty reply to the massive objection which the very words Jewish state are certain to arouse. Henceforth, we shall proceed more slowly, to meet further objections and to explain in detail what has as yet only been indicated. And we shall try in the interest of this pamphlet to avoid making it a dull exposition. Short, aphoristic chapters will therefore best answer the purpose. If I wish to substitute a new building for an old one, I must demolish before I construct. I shall therefore keep to this natural sequence. In the first and general part, I shall explain my ideas, remove all prejudices, determine essential political and economic conditions, and develop the plan. In the special part, which is divided into 3 principal sections, I shall describe its execution. These 3 sections are the Jewish Company, local groups, and the Society of Jews. The society is to be created first, the company last. But in this exposition the reverse order is preferable, because it is the financial soundness of the enterprise which will chiefly be called into question, and doubts on this score must be removed first. In the conclusion, I shall try to meet every further objection that could possibly be made. My Jewish readers will, I hope, follow me patiently to the end. Some will naturally make their objections in the order of succession, other than the chosen for their refutation. But whoever finds his doubt dispelled should give allegiance to the cause. Although I speak of reason, I am fully aware that reason alone will not suffice. Old prisoners do not willingly leave their cells. We shall see whether the youth whom we need at our command, the youth who irresistibly draw on the old, carry them forward on strong arms, and transform rational motives into enthusiasm.